when I started Occuspace, it was really not to be a company. It was just to kind of solve my own personal pain point. I was from a small town in Florida, moved here to UCSD, hated how crowded campus was, hated how crowded the whole city was. And so I was like, man, I wish I knew how busy every Florida Geisel was before I went, how busy the gym or the dining halls were before I actually went. And so I was like, okay, at that point I was a junior electrical engineering student. I said, I think there's probably a way that I could solve this problem. I could somehow figure out how crowded places are in real time, report that in an app, show students, really just show myself, and that would be a cool, senior project, and that was the idea. And so I pretty much pitched that idea to the basement. The basement was the first group that kind of told us, hey, like that could actually be cool, you could do this. Had no idea really how we were going to do it. We got, I believe it was $2,000 or $5,000 in budget from the basement for winning a pitch contest or something like that. Gave us the funds to actually start experimenting, buying some hardware, figuring out what we were gonna do. Was it gonna be camera technology to count people, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi? What we were gonna do, crowdsourcing? We narrowed in on Bluetooth and Wi-Fi for privacy reasons, for cost reasons, for deployment reasons. We deployed it across campus, got it to actually be accurate in counting people with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, reported it on an app, and it was like, great, this is cool. I've solved my own personal problem. When I launched the app, 5,700 students downloaded it on the first day. And all we did was we made one Facebook post in UCSD Free and for Sale, if that's still a big UCSD group now. And 5,700 people downloaded it. And it was like, wow, this is super cool. People actually care about this. I'm not the only one that hates how crowded REMAC is or Geisel. And then what was really interesting was 2 weeks later, the vice chancellor in charge of real estate at UCSD called me up and he said, Nick, how do you know how busy all of my buildings are? And I was like, oh my gosh, at this point I'm a senior and I'm like, I'm gonna get expelled right before I graduate. This is gonna be terrible. And he goes, I am spending $1 billion a year on construction, renovation, leases at UCSD. UCSD actually has the biggest construction budget of any university in the world. And he said, I have no idea how anybody's using my buildings. And I was like, well, that seems like a problem. And he said, let's deploy you all across campus and start optimizing how we actually build, lease, maintain our construction real estate on campus. And that's kind of how we got started. I really didn't build this knowing the problem that we could solve. I just built it for a pain point. And thankfully found a champion at UCSD through people at the basement, people at the innovation office, connecting me with all these different folks. We found a champion, and that guy knew, how to use our data better than I did. And that was pretty incredibly important, and I don't think we would have really been a company without that guy. I mean, if I got married later, he'd probably be in my wedding. But that's kind of a little bit of the origin story. And then I was lucky enough to raise seed funding when I graduated, right before I graduated as a senior. So I rolled right into this being my full-time job, and my two co-founders and we kind of just grinded it out for quite a long time, still grinding it out.
Excellent, thank you. So I love the story of how it kind of just started as an idea and then now it's a full-blown company. So can you tell us a little bit more about your transition from a student entrepreneur to an entrepreneur post-graduation?
Yeah, there was a lot of different steps. I mean, I kind of touched on it. I was lucky enough to raise capital. We raised $225K when I was like a month before I graduated, and that allowed my two co-founders and I to take a salary, do this full-time, and not everybody gets that chance. And so the transition for us was really great. It was like, I was already getting like C- in all my higher ed, EE classes, because I was spending most of my time on Occuspace during my senior year anyway. So that was like, this is great. Now I can spend all of my time. And we all moved into a house together. It was kind of a real hacker house, vibe that we had going on. We were paying ourselves pretty much nothing. and we loved what we were doing. We didn't know what we were doing, but we were trying to find advisors and customers as best we could. I think one big decision that we made early on, we had to turn down jobs. My two co-founders and I all had job offers from energy companies, one of them from Qualcomm, like paying 4 or 5 times more salary than we were paying ourselves. And our philosophy was kind of like, if we take these jobs making 4 or 5 times more than we are now, we're never gonna be able to go back to making, scrappy startup salary. And eventually we're gonna get married, we're gonna have kids, we're gonna have more responsibilities. I don't know what I would do if I started a company now with a wife and a kid. We all looked at each other and said, this is gonna be the easiest time in our life. We can always start companies, people make it work, but this is the easiest time in our lives where we have the least responsibility. We can get by on the lowest amount of money. We can all live together, and we'll always have these jobs in the future. So let's kind of take the plunge now while it's easier. I think that was a decision that we all appreciated. One of my co-founders isn't with the company anymore, and I talk to him all the time, and he still, is very thankful that he turned down Qualcomm and worked for us and developed his career in a whole different trajectory. So that was definitely a key decision that we all made. And that once you get to work on your idea full time, that's just fun, So that was the easy part.
Great, and that's such a good point too. I think a lot of students realize, hopefully you all realize that right now is the time to just experiment, testing things, and to go through life. There's a lot more responsibility, so this is a really good time just to test it out, see what happens. And as a student, you kind of have that student safety net to fall back on. Like I'm a student startup, I'm exploring other things, but I'm also a student, so it's a great point. So I want to open it up to all of you for any questions that you might have. So if you have a question,
yeah. So you talked about how it was like making the change from student entrepreneur to full-time entrepreneur. Personally, from the business aspect, how was that navigating, making deals with companies, making deals with schools, legal stuff, corporate stuff? How was all that?
There's a lot of different sides to that, but pretty much all of it was universally a nightmare and really difficult. The governance operations side, I'm still paying back mistakes that I made from those early days, like filing taxes the right way. There's this thing called R&D tax credit, where when you some amount of money that you pay your engineers for R&D, you get back in your taxes. This last year, we would have gotten 6 figures back in a tax credit from the government. But because I filed my taxes the wrong way in 2017, for the $2,000 we got from the basement, we didn't get that 6-figure check in tax credits. And so that was, there's so many mistakes that you make because I'm thinking, we don't have a lot of money, we're scrappy, I'm gonna file my taxes myself. I don't need an accountant, I don't need anybody to do this for me, and it just cost you a lot down the road. Same thing for lawyers, same thing for benefits and payroll. You make all these little mistakes. In the end, you can recover from them. They're annoying. From a sales standpoint, it was pretty fun because we had one customer, UCSD, and it was well, how do we replicate this? Who's buying? Who will listen? We can make a whole new pitch deck. We can go to conferences. It was never harder to close sales, but it was never more interesting. And because it was so much based on relationship at that point. I didn't have a bunch of case studies. I didn't have a bunch of customer testimonials. I didn't have a beautiful portal and a polished product. I had a Raspberry Pi soldered together in a homemade enclosure. And I was trying to sell it to, top 20 universities in the country. And so it was based on going to events. I think this died.
Okay. You can try this one. This one's not that.
It was, all those early sales were all based on going to events and meeting people and connecting with people. And telling them the story, telling them what we were doing, seeing the passion that we had, telling them like, you know, essentially like, invest in us and we'll invest in you. And we haven't lost, I don't think we've lost any one of our first 10 customers. They're still customers today. They've all, I actually looked at this the other day, on average, our first 10 customers have about tripled in size from when we originally deployed to them. So the sales side was relationship based at first because you don't have anything to go on. You don't have a lot of proof. You have an idea, you haven't proved you can do it, you haven't proved a ton of ROI yet. You have little specks of that. And then from an engineering product standpoint, you're just trying to make things not break. That's pretty much it. Hardware, software, I'm so jealous of you guys. We talked before, you have a software product. Never do hardware. It's very hard. So that makes everything way more complicated. But you just kind of set a lot of all-nighters before you launch products, before customers are actually using them, and somehow it works out a little bit. But listening to your customer and trying to build what they want. But I'm 6 years into this, and I still have a vision of my product that I want that we're still 2 years away from. So you'll never get to where you want to go, but the list keeps getting longer.
Yeah, so following off of Alan's question. So I remember you saying for UCSD, it's like personal relationships and stuff like that, expanding it. How did you expand to the other schools? And then were you targeting big schools or small schools, and which ones had success?
In those first lead gen campaigns we did, higher ed is a pretty interesting category because you can do lead gen differently than any other vertical. Everybody on higher ed, you can find their phone number and email online. So we said, okay, I want the director of capital planning, director of space planning, director of the library, the head of assessment for the library. Those were the personas we were going after. I can go look at the top 100 schools in the country, and I can, scan those websites, maybe make a bot to do that, pull all of that contact information, and then I don't even need MailChimp or anything fancy. I can just personally email, 400 people and do that every 2 weeks until they respond to me, for 4 or 5 touch points. And so we did that. We got a couple responses. I got UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara, because I was, talking all about UCSD in my emails. So I got those 2 customers, went to a conference, met with some people, met with a consulting firm who introduced me to folks at McGill University in Canada. They became our 3rd or 4th customer. So it was really like, do everything you can to get in front of the people that you think are your buyers, and then go over the top to please them. Like UC Santa Barbara, UC Irvine, I was like at their door the next day pretty much. I was like, I'm driving up and I'm gonna meet with this person like in their office. I'm not gonna do a Zoom call. I'm not gonna call them on their phone. Like they responded to me, like, tell me any time in your next 2 weeks that you can meet and I'll be at your office. And then you start to grow that relationship. So you guys in higher ed, like once you find out who your buyer is, all it takes is grunt work to like get that person at every school in the country.
Thank
A
you.
lot harder in corporate and private companies. You have to buy those lists and it costs a lot of money.
How did you and your initial team form originally back when you were starting?
They were all buddies of mine, pretty much. My first co-founder was my roommate, and we were always trying to start companies. Like we both challenged each other to both have an idea journal, and we were like, let's come up with a cool idea. And we said every day we need to write something in this idea journal that's a problem that we had that day, or that's a new idea for a company. And so the day before I had the idea for Occuspace, my idea was a 2-sided pan because I didn't like flipping the sausage for breakfast. So they're not all good ideas. You gotta have a lot of ideas to have a good idea. But he was my roommate. We were always talking about this stuff. Then I looked and said, within my network, who are the smartest people I know? And it was 2 people in my fraternity, and 2, one was actually a structural engineer, but he was like a 4.0 genius, tennis player, did all this stuff, and I was like, this guy doesn't know anything about hardware, but he's the smartest person I know. He'll learn whatever it takes, and he has, and he's now, probably one of the top 5 smartest people in Bluetooth and Wi-Fi machine learning in the world. The other guy was another guy in my fraternity. He was the guy who I poached from Qualcomm, and a great coder. And so I pretty much just looked in my network of people that I somewhat know. I wasn't even like great friends with all of them. I just said, who's the smartest people that I know, and can I convince them to work for me for free? So, yeah.
What were the specifics of your sales process looking like? How long did it take you to close them? And what was your approach to, closing those first few clients?
Yeah, the first few, hey, Manal, what's going on, man? Good to see you.
Good.
Another UCSD longtime basement alum. First few customers, the sales process was really long. We didn't have a lot of credibility. I didn't know what I was doing. They're like, hey, you need to get approved by IT and security and privacy. You need a privacy policy. You need to pass IT security review. And I'm like, what do they want? I don't know. And that's never what you want to do for IT security. You always want to give them stuff and not make it open-ended. So those ones took 6-9 months. Today, now that we have our documentation, we have a process, it's 2 to 3 months sales cycle, sometimes a little faster, sometimes a little slower. And we have different sales cycles for different types of customers. Higher ed, we have 2 different types of customers, people who are just gyms, dining halls, libraries. That's a 2 to 3 month sales cycle. Then we have folks that are office space. That's most of our customers. We actually work in office space and we help them reduce the square footage that they need. That's a 6 to 9 month sales cycle. But average customer value of the gyms, dining halls, library is 10 to 20K. For the office space, it's 100 to 500K. So it's the higher dollar amount, the longer the sales cycle will be. So that's pretty normal, but you find your contact that's your champion, and they'll take you through the process originally. And then once you have that process defined, you'll say, okay, this is what this customer wanted, each of these steps. Then you'll plan for that, and you'll get ahead of the customer, and you'll say, hey, this is what our process looks like. We're going to do this, 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 and this. And they're like, cool, that's what I want anyway. And I say, hey, here's all, after the first meeting, I send everybody all the IT, security, privacy reviews, because I know that they're going to ask for that. So I want to push the process as fast as I can. I don't know how much of that answers your question. The sales cycle is going to be different for who your buyer is, what your dollar amount is, and how you get budget, how your buyer gets budget. So it's hard to have one set sales cycle for everybody, but I'd say it's gonna be painful for the first couple. It's gonna go slow, but really understand what is each process, each step in the process for your customer, and then get ahead of it for the next one. And say, hey, I've already got everything ready for you that you're gonna ask me. Here it is, here's this. We're a legit company, we're not just making this up as we go. That's kind of the image you want to convey.
Yeah, for your first customer, which is PSD, how did you end up figuring out how much money they should be paying you for your product? Because you had no basis, you were also a lot younger, barely formed. So how did you find that price point? And then was that price point accurate, or did you find out that was too low or too high?
We set our first price with UCSD because I had these 2 angel investors, and they were going to give me $200K. And they said, we'll give you $200K if UCSD will pay you this much for what you're doing. And I was like, okay, I don't know. And so I go to this meeting with the chancellor of UCSD and all these people, and I say, I think our first contract was $25K. And I was like, this is how much it will be. And they're just like, yeah, that's no problem. And I was just like, no, it should be more than that. And so, it was totally made up, man. I had no idea. I knew how much it cost to do. Like, it probably costs like $2,500. We were charging them 25. Like that $2,500 was hardware. It wasn't all of our time that we spent developing it. But that it was really a shot in the dark. And then as we talked to more people, we understood how budgets worked a little bit. We understood that, hey, if we're making a sale directly to the gyms, dining halls, libraries, schools of this size can usually sign a contract under X number of dollars without needing outside budget approval. So like usually for big schools, libraries, 25 to 50K. If our contract comes in under that, they can just approve it without needing to go through a big RFP, a big long process. And so that was kind of like, okay, we need to keep our prices below that. And then when we realized, what do our competitors charge? We're not the only people doing this. To this day, we're still about 8 to 10 times cheaper than the next cheapest competitor out there. And this is hotly debated in my company right now. We should raise prices. And I'm the only person saying we should lower our prices.
Oh, yeah. So I remember you saying colleges as well as like corporate buildings and stuff like that. Have you guys expanded into Airbnbs and things like that? Because I know Airbnbs, sometimes they monitor how many people are allowed and stuff.
Yeah, we've thought about that. There's a company called Noise Aware that kind of does a microphone in Airbnbs, and it's just for noise. And we approached them, we gave them a pitch of like, you know, give your like renter, the house owners, the ability to see how many people are coming into the space. Never really landed. They said, honestly, we don't care about how many people come into the space, we just want to know noise. So we thought about it. I thought it would be a cool use case, but I didn't have the right value prop for those people. They didn't like, Airbnb actually doesn't want to kind of tell on the residents that rent a place and have a party. They only want to know if it's actually causing a problem. If you have a quiet party, Airbnb's like, who cares? Everybody's happy. If you have a loud party, then it disrupts the neighbors, which disrupts the landowner, and that's when it's a problem.
So if you were to start another company, would you go back to hardware or would it be something different?
I would try my absolute hardest to not do hardware.
I've heard that like second time founder dilemma where they don't want to go back to the initial space. What is your take on that?
Oh, can you repeat that?
So like I was listening to this podcast yesterday and they were talking about like how second time founders usually don't go back to the initial space they started with for the first company, and they have this dilemma. And like I would like, what's your take on that? Like, what would you do if you were in that situation?
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. You get burnt out on your space a little bit, but you also become an expert in it. You know, I'm one of the more knowledgeable people in the world on space utilization data, particularly for office spaces and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi signal analysis. Super niche like area, but there is a lot of opportunity in that. And so if I didn't have a startup, I could kind of reuse that knowledge, probably save a little bit of time, but it would be, for me personally, not as exciting. Like I want to learn something new, you know, I want to do a whole new thing where it's like when you start a new sport, you're like really bad at first, but the fun thing is getting better faster. Once you're already like a really good golfer, it's really hard to get like from a, you know, scratch golfer to -1 golfer, but it's kind of easy to go from like I'm a +30 golfer to a +20 golfer. So I find a lot of joy and excitement and passion out of learning new things. So for me, it'll be a new space. I won't do the same thing, but I will feel like I'm wasting a lot of knowledge, and that's just something that I'm okay with, kind of a little bit.
So, would you like, with that in mind, would you be looking to exit anytime in like the next 10 years? And like, what would you be looking for if you were to try and sell?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm looking to exit in the next 10 years. That's a long time. If you said the next like 2 years, maybe not that soon. Next 10 years for sure. You know, what I'm looking for is mostly to take care of my investors and my employees, the stakeholders that bet on me and my idea. When you're a founder, if you have a good exit that makes investors and employees happy, you're gonna do well. You own most of the company. So like, that's kind of in the background for me. What I think about most is like these two guys that invested in me when I was a senior in college, and I knew freaking nothing, and have been with me for 6 years through this. Those first employees that like have wives and kids and took, you know, huge salary cuts to come work for me. Like those are the people I want to make sure. Like we had an acquisition offer at the end of last year, and for me, sure, it would have made sense probably, but for those people, it wouldn't have made sense. And that was kind of what was driving my decisions. So hopefully in 3 to 5 years, we'll be in a better place where we can get an acquisition offer that we like. But you know, the smartest people I know say, build your company for scale, not for sale. And like, don't worry about setting yourself up for acquisition. Worry about providing the most amount of value to your customers and building your company, your revenue, your processes. And at some point, somebody will come. You know, you don't need to like be targeting acquisition forever. If you build something valuable, there'll be opportunities to sell the business at some point. So that's kind of what we try to focus. We don't actively think about acquisition or exits really. We think about just building the company. Like the acquisition offer we got last year, you know, was out of nowhere.
What are some of your tips on preventing burnout?
Like who you work with. If you like who you work with and you like what you do, you know, you genuinely find it interesting, you know, and you just don't even accept it as a possibility. You will be burned out. Like I am burned out. I've been burned out for years. But it's not about being burned out. This isn't like, I don't know, man. You take people's money, you take people's investment, people come work for you. It's like, that's not a good enough excuse to stop. You know, like everybody's going to be burned out. Everybody's going to be like stressed to the max. But you just have to keep going. You know, one of my favorite investors, who's now our CTO, he quit a Fortune 500 CTO job and came work for us after being one of our initial seed investors. And he told me, Nick, like the people who make it, who sell their companies, whose companies are successful, are the people who stick it out the longest. Everybody will hit tough times. Every company will have to cut. Every founder might have to not pay themselves for a while. We went 10 months without paying ourselves at one point between funding rounds, and we just didn't grow enough to raise more money. And so yeah, like we're burned out. I'm doing Amazon delivery, Uber Eats, like whatever I can to make money at that point. And you're like, geez, should I just get a real job and just do this? And my investors in my ear saying like, dude, you have customers that like what you do. Like you'll figure out the processes, the sales processes, all of this. Just like, don't give up. And there's a thin line there. Like if you don't have any customers that don't like what you do, then maybe you should give up at some point. But if you have customers that like what you do, then just like stick it out. You take an investment, you have employees betting on you. Burnout's gonna happen, but if you can spend time with people you like, and if you can, you know, actually enjoy what you do, and if you can talk to customers. Talking to customers is definitely probably the best advice I could give you. Is when I talk to customers, and not just like to sell them, but to brainstorm how our product can be better and how we can better solve their problems and better understand their problems. Personally, that gets me pretty fired up and gets me rejuvenated, but I've never talked to a founder that's not burnt out. Manal, are you burnt out from EDT?
Oh, often.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on a number of psychiatric meds. and I'm a serious animal. But I was kind of, having issues before the whole startup thing. So.
Everybody's burnt out. Like, it's just, if you're going to quit when you get burnt out, then don't do a startup.